Welcome back to 9 is 10 After Party. A little update on the last few weeks. There are no party rings left by this point. Some of the cocktail sausages are still clinging to the tinfoil covered watermelon. But the Jammy Dodgers and I think, what's left of the oven baked sausage rolls are being clung to by a metallic creature in the corner that doesn't seem to want to let them go. It isn't eating them, just kind of poking them with a plunger. Basically, this week's all about Daleks. As you've probably already figured out, last week we had Dalek, and I'm joined by the man behind the Daleks right now. The voice, the mind, the brain, and hopefully not the tendrils, but everything else. Mr. Nicholas Briggs. Nick, welcome to 9 is 10.
Well, what a delight and a pleasure to be here. I feel that, all my life's ambitions have been granted to me in this very moment.
It's, it is destiny. It is fate.
Destiny. Destiny of the Daleks. No, so it's the wrong episode.
No. It could work as a title, though. They should think about that one. And all the younger listeners are very confused. But not all of them, because that's the thing. This is a celebration of 10 years of the return of Doctor Who. And it's amazing how much this has now spread to a new generation and a generation since then.
Yeah.
I mean, how does it feel to be a part of that? That's a pretty big question to open on, but...
That's all right. I'm here for the big questions. Don't give me any trivia. You'd be amazed to hear that it feels fantastic. And in some weird, rather sad way, it's kind of defined me. You know what I mean? Because I'm a mad Doctor Who fan, loved Doctor Who all my life. I can't remember when I didn't love Doctor Who. It started a couple of years after I was born, but, so presumably there were some moments in my life that didn't involve Doctor Who, but I'm far too young. I was far too young at the time to remember them now. What I mean is I'm far too old, just generally. So is any of this making sense? I don't know. So to finally become the voice of the thing that I was kind of obsessed with as a kid, I never planned it because it's too much of a weird ambition. You know what I mean? You can want to be a train driver or a scientist or something, but being the voice of that monster that you like in Doctor Who is a bit weird. So sort of coming full circle, as it were, to become that in my professional life is just the most amazing thing, and it's sort of when people ask you what you do and you tell them generally that I tell them that I'm a writer and a director, and they go, oh yeah, and then I say, and I also do the voice of the Daleks, then you've got them. You know what I mean? And I'm happy to embrace it, so I love it.
Rewind back to Tiny Nick, all those years ago. The Tiny Nick! We sort of slipped into the Goon show there. Little Jim! Going back to the beginning, what are your earliest memories of Doctor Who?
William Hartnell. Sort of his last series. I remember the Celestial Toymaker stuff. I remember some of that, and I certainly remember the 10th Planet. Because I used to go around with a small stool stuck up my jumper. I mean, a stool you sit on. That probably doesn't help saying that. But you know what I mean? A wooden stool. That's what I'm trying to say. Oh, God. Stuffed up my jumper. And I had one of those tiny little mouth organs, the little ones, not the big, and I used to put one of those in my mouth and sort of speak through that because I had it in my head that the Cybermen spoke in a sort of tuneful way because they spoke in that really weird way of speaking, So that's one of my earliest memories. And then the other thing is there used to be a programme on, I don't know whether there still is these days for kids, called Junior Points of View. The BBC used to do a programme called Points of View where people used to write in and say, Dear BBC, YOYOY, etc. I would gladly donate my kidneys to fund this programme, that sort of thing. And they used to do a junior version with Robert Robinson presenting it, who was a man who was famous for presenting things like Call My Bluff, and more famous really for having an outrageous comb-over haircut. And anyway, he used to present Junior Points of View, and I remember him... they showed a shot of William Hartnell, what I thought at the time, sort of writhing and sweating, but it was just that shot of him before the regeneration, which was sort of very shiny. And he was saying, and is Doctor Who dead? And I remember just being so traumatised by the idea that he was changing into another person, as indeed, kids used to be about the Doctor changing. I don't think they are now, by the way, because they introduced it so early in the run of the new series. So now it's become a defining thing about the series that the Doctor changes. It's one of the main things you say about the Doctor now, that character who changes his face. In those days, it was something that was a sort of traumatic experience that you didn't really look forward to. And certainly, whoever took over playing the Doctor, whether it was Patrick Troughton or John Pertwee or Tom Baker, nobody said to them in their first press interview, "When are you leaving?" Which is more or less what they say to all the actors now. I mean, David Tennant joked about it. He said, the moment you take this job, people are asking you when you're going because they're excited about the next regeneration because it's an exciting thing. It's something that when I was a kid, I used to sort of dread the Doctor going. It was, Anyway, sorry, it's a rather long answer to a very short question.
It's good. It's good because it means that from an early age, like a lot of younger viewers watching the show, instantly gripped by the concept, by the character, by the worlds of it in general. So, was William your Doctor, or?
No, because I didn't know. I was very, very young at the time. I was born in 1961, so I was a real tiddler when that was on. But my son, who's 5, going on 6 now, he's he watched Doctor Who from the age of sort of 3.5, really. But of course he has access to DVDs and hard drive recordings and all that, so he can remember those things and look back at them. But so my memories of it are very unclear. So my Doctor is really Patrick Troughton.
Hey!
Because I mean, I unequivocally say that because I think all the actors who played the Doctor, have a massive amount of respect for Patrick Troughton as a brilliant actor and a brilliant Doctor. And also he's no longer with us, so that they can't be actively jealous without being tasteless. They can't be annoyed that I've nominated someone who isn't them. I would say I love all the Doctors. I think they all offer, so many different aspects, and I've worked with a lot of them. But yeah, he's my favourite Doctor because really Doctor Who became the programme we recognise now during the Patrick Troughton era. With William Hartnell, it was a show about a grumpy old bloke who materialised on a planet, and if he didn't much like the look of it, wanted to get away as soon as possible, but usually something fell in front of the TARDIS or prevented him from getting back into the TARDIS. But mostly he just wanted to get the hell out of Dodge, But when Patrick Troughton became the Doctor, very quickly the show redesigned itself to be about this, hero who goes round solving all the problems of the universe and fighting evil. He does that lovely speech in Moonbase where he says there are some corners of the universe where the most horrible things have been bred, or whatever it is he says, and that, that was a change for Doctor Who. It wasn't like that before, and now, ever since, that's what Doctor Who has been, and that's what we take for granted. So I also love the the Patrick Troughton era for that, because it defined the show as we know it now. And I love the way that Patrick Troughton was, when he was scared, he looked scary, because he actually had quite a scary face. So that sort of, again, I've learnt from my son, the times when my son has been most frightened, and it's only been 2 times I can think of, it's when I've looked scared or upset for some reason, because you look to the parent to read what the situation is, and for youngsters watching Doctor Who, certainly in those days, the Doctor was like a parent to you in that respect. He was the barometer for how scary something was, and then he could be massively reassuring and fun and nice and charming. So those 2 things, scariness and reassurance, are the 2 key factors for Doctor Who for me, and why I think it's been so popular, because it offers that for kids. It offers that excitement and terror, but also it says, there, don't worry, everything's all right. And those 2 things complement each other brilliantly.
One thing that certainly takes people through a range of emotions when it comes to Doctor Who are, and it's been at least 3 minutes without us mentioning them, the Daleks. What's your earliest Dalek memory?
That's rather confused for me, because I think my earliest memory is Power of the Daleks, and that's for sure of the Daleks, which is Patrick Troughton's first story. Where they were so worried about changing the main actor, they thought we'd better give him the Daleks to start off with, to sort of, so people would be certain it was Doctor Who.
Ease the transition for those who are still in doubt that it could work.
Yeah. And in many ways, perhaps it's a controversial thing to say now, but I think it's the truth historically. The Daleks were Doctor Who in those days, They're the reason that Doctor Who continued. Doctor Who would not have been a long-running series were it not for the Daleks. They secured its I don't take any responsibility for that, by the way. I wasn't doing them then, you know. They were important. The thing is, when Power of the Daleks came on, I already knew about the Daleks. I didn't say, "Oh, what are these?" So I must have seen them before. I certainly had the big blue book, the Dalek book, you know, the one. I certainly had that, so I'd seen the Daleks in that, but I can't have just seen them in a book. I must have. So it's a mystery to me which was the first Dalek series I saw, but my first memory of them on screen is Power of the Daleks, yeah.
So as a kid then, you weren't so much, at least by the time of Power of the Daleks, weren't so much scared of them or fascinated by them, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do remember being very scared in that moment in Evil of the Daleks, which at the end of... which episode is it? It's the surviving episode, actually, because it was great to see that again when... Oh, no, it is at the end of episode 1 where the guy goes into that room and the Dalek says, "Who are you? Yeah. Who are you?" and then exterminates him. So, I mean, I remember being very scared about that, but then that's because that guy looked very scared. But yeah, I was more fascinated by the Daleks than scared of them, and kind of got disappointed when they lost. Which is, a bit, you know, when I said that in front of Stephen Moffat, he said, "You may have misunderstood the entire format of the series, Nick." But, you know, it's that same fascination with those metallic creatures that makes children fans of Thunderbirds, you know, because of the big machines, the tech, you know, all that stuff, you know, the hardware. Kids love all that. And the Daleks were, you know... Of all the Doctor Who monsters, the sort of techie hardware monster, weren't they? Because they didn't look like human beings, and they sort of looked a bit like a tank, and as well as maybe a radiator and a refrigerator. But, you know, that's the beautiful thing about the Daleks. It's a mixture of the sort of reassuring and the terrifying, you know.
It's like dinosaurs, the fascination everyone seems to have with dinosaurs at a very early age. Like, they're horrific, like most of them, at least the meat-eaters. You wouldn't really want to encounter one, ever. But at the same time... quite interesting, very cool to see.
Yeah,
you know, I can, you know, I can agree with you with the Daleks winning. There's some sort of stories, quite a few actually, bizarrely in the current run, where I'm like, oh, they should have won that time. I mean, obviously, they should never win, but...
No, you know. I know what you mean. I mean, when I've done stuff for Big Finish, for the audios, right, I did a series called Dalek Empire, and although the Daleks didn't win, it was just a very ongoing battle. So there was this feeling that even though you could defeat the Daleks in certain pockets of the galaxy, as it were, their relentless war machine would continue, and they would never be quite defeated. But I think in the context of a Doctor Who story, you kind of have to blast them into oblivion, you know. Although, you know, there was like Victory of the Daleks where they got away at the end. The title gave it away, really.
Yeah. Well, spoiler right there from the beginning. Yeah. Now, one thing the Daleks couldn't prevent, unfortunately, was the show sort of unceremoniously but not spectacularly bowing out in 1989. Yes. But you played a very big part in keeping the spirit of Doctor Who alive and kicking during the 90s. For those unfamiliar, could you give us a very basic rundown of the stuff that you were involved in prior to the relaunch?
Yes, I mean, there was a lot of sort of fan activity. Mm-hmm. For me, it culminated in Big Finish in 1999, which are the audio adventures of Doctor Who, licensed by the BBC, where we were licensed to do all the existing Doctors then, you know, Doctors 1 to 8. But before that, I'd been involved with sort of unofficial video spin-offs where people had sort of paid for the rights for certain monsters. I directed a couple of straight-to-video dramas featuring the Autons.
Yes, I'm a proud owner of all three of them, actually.
Ah, yeah. I wrote the original script for the third one, but then... it sounds like it's so highfalutin with something, such a small project, but wasn't happy with the way it was going, so withdrew and put my pseudonym, Arthur Wallace, on it. So that was me. I certainly wrote the original draft that they then adapted and completely messed up. Bitter me, no. But I wrote and directed the first two, imaginatively titled Auton and Auton 2. And had great fun doing those. I also did, and still do from time to time, a video interview series called Mythmakers.
Yes.
Where I interview the stars from Doctor Who. And that's That's going to come back in a bigger way over the next few years, actually. Keith Barnfather, who produces them, who owns and runs Real Time Pictures, he and I have been talking about stuff we're going to do in the future, including a sort of big live event as well, which may happen next year.
Oh, nice. Should keep an eye out for that one.
Yes, it'll be fun, I think. I think finally we'll do a Mythmakers interview on me, so we'll have to get someone else to interview me. I never envisaged when I started doing them back in the, I don't know, was it the 80s? Probably was. Yeah, it was. The mid-80s I started doing that. I never thought that I would be the subject of an interview, I was the interviewer, which is difficult, isn't it?
It's very strange. Sorry, I'm trying to think of a way to get around you still interviewing yourself, but sort of not in a simplistic way. We're gonna have to think of something. We'll get to the
a format for me. Yeah,
we'll start brainstorming. Now, Big Finish is in full swing by the early 2000s, and over on the website, the team are working on for the 40th anniversary Screen with the Schalke, and Doctor Who magazine is continuing to run. There is still a very big fan presence, which is impressive for a show that was essentially kind of dead, really, at this point in terms of on television.
Yeah, sort of unprecedented, really. I don't know. Yeah.
But where were you when the whispers of its return started to come about, or were you within the realms?
The inner circle.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, when did I hear? I mean, I know before the whispers started, I had a very interesting conversation with Stephen Moffat because I used to go and see, because a bunch of us who knew Steve, people who knew him better than me, sort of introduced me to him. We used to go and see Coupling, his comedy series. We used to go and see it being filmed. We were in the audience. And we always used to go to the bar afterwards and all have a drink and a chat. And I remember Steve talking about Doctor Who to me, and he said, and he probably said this to many, many people, he said, now is the time Doctor Who can come back. He said, because a lot of us, meaning himself and people like Gareth Roberts and also probably Russell, he said, we're old enough and have had enough experience to be relatively important in television. So we are the people who can bring it back. He said, if it doesn't happen in this generation now, he said, it won't happen for another generation, because it will have missed its sort of sweet spot, really, to come back, And he was absolutely right, because I think about 2 years later, it came back. When did I first hear? There was a full start, wasn't there, in Doctor Who magazine? There were many full starts in Doctor Who magazine when Russell's name was mentioned in 2000 about it. But I don't remember. I remember when it was just underway and there was a pre-production meeting with all the licensees, but Big Finish wasn't invited, but Doctor Who magazine was, and Clayton Hickman was the editor then, and he phoned me up to say, listen, I shouldn't tell you this, but Russell T Davies said the Daleks are coming back. And I said, well, I hope Nick Briggs is doing the voice. And Russell said, well, he is, but don't tell him yet because we haven't asked his agent. And then about 2 or 3 other people phoned me with the same bit of top secret information that they'd been told not to tell me. And they all told me. And so I had this excruciating wait of several months while, my best friend Rob Shearman was writing the Dalek episode, and I was wondering whether I was going to do the voice or not, I'd heard there was a rumour that Andy Serkis was going to do it, and I thought, yes, of course, he's famous, of course he'll do it. They won't get little farty me to do it, but they did. I got a very rare call from my then agent. He never really phoned me.
Could we speak to Nicholas Farty Briggs, please?
Hello. It's me, yes. I almost knew that I'd got the job when I saw his name illuminate on my phone, because he hadn't phoned me for so long. I thought, well, this can be the only job that's coming up, And I think the second person, I can't remember the first person I texted now, but the second person I texted about it was David Tennant, funnily enough. Yeah. And, who wasn't Doctor Who at that point, but, I think we'd just done Dalek Empire and kept in touch a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. It's annoying that I can't remember when I first heard about it. I was working with David Tennant on Dalek Empire when it was announced that Chris Eccleston was going to be the Doctor. It had just come out in the newspapers, and David brought a newspaper, and we were going, "Oh, Chris Eccleston, that's interesting, isn't it? Oh, that's going to be good." Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective as well, thinking about the man who would be the Doctor, no idea that one day he will be, chatting about the current one and being excited about it purely as a fan as well. That's rather weird.
And I had a weird conversation. He said he had many conversations like this. While we were filming Chris's last 2 episodes, I met up with David for lunch. We were in touch all the time, actually, because he was asking me how it was going. And, and I was going to show him all my behind-the-scenes videos. I said, are you sad enough to come round and watch some of the stuff I've shot on set? Because I had special permission to shoot a lot of this stuff. It's my retirement fund, obviously. And he said, I'm way sad enough to come and see that, yeah. And then, the next thing that happened was that it was announced he was the Doctor. But I'd had this lunch with him when I was saying, do you know, I've got a funny feeling Chris isn't going to come back for a second series. I don't know. I mean, someone said something to me and I don't know, I said, I reckon you should talk to your agent because they've obviously established that the Doctor can be very different and, maybe much younger. So why don't you? And he went, oh, well, that's very interesting. And then later he told me, I'm so sorry, Nick. He said, I already knew I had the part, but I wasn't allowed to tell you,
They had to play full-on Casanova and just charm you into thinking it was, like, oh,
It's funny, because he was working for Russell T Davies at the same time I was working for Russell T Davies, and we were constantly exchanging notes, It's like, oh, Russell just said something very nice about you. Oh, he just said something very nice about you. Sort of texts were going back and forth.
From a Dalek point of view, though, you had the 10th Doctor in your sights before you could do anything about it. You could have stopped him.
It's true, actually. I could have changed history, yes.
It would have happened.
Yes, I would do it. That power would set me up above the gods.
All right, steady on.
Sorry.
Let's not play God here. Or the Maker, in that case. But speaking of the Maker, like you said, Rob Shearman had written the script for Dalek, sort of loosely adapting Jubilee, which was a big finish.
That was the starting point for it, yeah.
How did you feel about approaching the Daleks when reading that script for the first time? Because you'd played the Daleks before.
That's why I got the job, because Russell had subscribed, or at least bought, I don't know which, our CDs, and he'd heard me doing the voice, and also read an article that I'd written, a rather sad article, in Doctor Who magazine about how to do the Dalek voice and all that malarkey. So he thought, this guy's the total solution, he can not only vocally do it, he's got the kit, and let's face it, there's no radiophonic workshop, so no one here knows how to do it, is probably what he was thinking. How did I approach it? Well, it's an interesting one because, after the read-through, Russell said to me, we know you can do the classic Dalek voice, but, don't be frightened to push the envelope and make it more expressive. And I think he was having a little bit, I may be doing him a disservice. One day you can interview him and ask him. I think he was having a little bit of a moment of thinking, oh my God, this is going out prime time on BBC One on Saturday, and the main thing in the episode is something that speaks like a speak your weight machine. And I think he was frightened, or at least trepidatious, about a modern audience thinking, you're kidding me. This thinking, you will be exterminated. Yeah, he wanted a little bit more than that. He wanted more guts to it, more emotion, and so I gave it that as well. And I think, we had no worries about that because the kids just fell for it all over again. I mean, if I may just tell you another little anecdote.
Oh yes.
When I was doing the Albert Hall, the first Doctor Who proms, which was on, I think, just after the series, the first series, and I went and rehearsed one day and then went along to the Albert Hall for the performance the next day, and it hadn't really struck me it was going to be a performance, but as I got to the Albert Hall, that big circular building, there were kids all the way around the building, and I could hear sort of noise coming from them, and as I got close to them I could hear, and most of them were going, exterminate, and I thought, oh my goodness, they've got it, they love the Daleks. I remember one kid was saying, you will be exterminated. You will always be exterminated. I thought, the Daleks have never said that. Perhaps we should get that into a script at some point. But, it was delightful. I think there was this worry that they go, nah, it looks like a dustbin. But no, they love it.
I think what's quite nice is, because again, that is one of the not stereotypes, but sort of archetypes that was attached to the Daleks as time went by and adults grow more affectionate toward them rather than scared of them, and it's the whole, the Great Space Dustbin. It's kind of nice that they get that reference in within the first minute of the Doctor having dialogue with it in Dalek as well.
Yes.
Just get that one in there.
Yes, they hung a lantern on that.
Yeah, now, that's obviously a very different kind of Dalek. I mean, wonderfully over the course of the last 10 years, we've encountered your standard Daleks, the Emperors and Supremes, but we've also encountered a few who are a little more should we say, damaged or corrupted, including the Dalek from Dalek. How did it feel to play that kind of version? Like, especially the stuff later in that episode where he begins to really change and connect to emotions.
Well, it makes it a much more interesting acting job. You know, it gives you a real... I mean, they are real characters anyway. They're just stunted characters, you know, with a very limited amount of emotion. But you'd have the same experience playing certain famous historical dictators, I imagine. But it just makes it more interesting, and it gives you more levels and, you know, to go quieter. And it gives you more interaction with the director because, as you probably all know, I do record it on set. So, you know, for example, in Dalek, that bit where Rose ends up touching the Dalek and, you know, it sort of, you know, gets her DNA and stuff. Joe Ahern, the director, kept rushing around and saying, quieter, slower, make Billy cry. That's what he said, you know. So I was sort of, I mean, the way I viewed it as the Dalek was being so canny, you know, just saying, come on, just put your hand on there, that's what I want, you know. And it seemed to, yeah, you know, it was a real acting process. Yeah.
I've got to ask about my favourite scene in that episode as well. Since this is the week of the anniversary of Dalek, it seems like the perfect opportunity. The scene between the Dalek and the Doctor when the Doctor first enters the let's call it a cell. It certainly wasn't like a hospital bay for this poor thing.
A hotel suite.
5-star little Dalek.
I don't even have ensuite.
How because I suppose as well this is the first time it's become quite commonplace now, the practice of performing it on set with the actors. But how did yourself and Chris approach this sequence? Because, like you say, you've got to try and coax Billy, coax Rose into doing a certain thing, like playing out a plan. But here, the Dalek is really kind of having a bit of fun with the Doctor.
Yes, I mean, it's a really apposite question because it was a very important moment, and we, first of all, stood on the set. And as happens now on set with rehearsals, the whole crew disappear and you're just there with the director and the actors and maybe the first assistant and the continuity person just checking the script. And we just did the scene. And I sort of, I think I stood by the Dalek and Chris did the scene with me there. And then after we'd done that, we had a little bit of discussion about it. And Chris was very keen on talking about the whole sort of... death camp. He said it was a bit like a death camp guard and a victim of the death camps meeting many years later, and he wanted that vibe to it. So we spoke about that quite a bit. And then when it was over and we'd run it for all the crew and they worked out how they were going to shoot it, although Joe Ahern, the director, had all this sort of thing pre-planned, but I think he was interested in discussion on it too. Chris said to me, would you mind just going over it with me again? And I said, oh, of course not, And then he took me, we were filming in the bowels of the Cardiff Stadium, and he took me sort of down all these corridors into this funny little room he had all on his own. Everything was freezing cold, we always filmed in the freezing cold. And he had a big heater there that illuminated the room with this sort of strange red-orange glow. And it was just me and Christopher Eccleston going over this scene over and over again, and he was giving it the full performance. And I felt quite guilty that I was reading it, frankly. But there he was going, what are you for, Dalek, in my face, It was a lovely experience. I felt at the time, I'm going to remember this for a long time. This is a special moment, my first Doctor Who on television. Yeah, it's great.
It was very cool. And again, like a lot of depth to play for the Dalek in that scene in particular, when he finds out for the very first time that he's the last one.
Yes.
I mean, that's a big deal for a Dalek.
Yes.
Which just blimey. But of course he wasn't the last one definitively, because they came back with aplomb for the season finale, where you also got to play the Emperor, who to this day is one of my favourite versions of an Emperor Dalek ever. And
I'm really pleased that you think that, but also Chris Eccleston was very nice about it, because he'd heard me do my Dalek voice before, and then when we did the first scene with the Emperor I remember Chris shouting over the top of the set to me, "Good voice, Nick, good voice!" He really liked it, and he was always very nice. He always came and found me at the end of the day, whichever dark corner they'd stuck me in, before, and just offered me his hand and gave me a big handshake and said, "Thanks ever so much, Nick. Thanks." A real gentleman. So that was such fun to do the Emperor voice. I mean, I think when I'd done the Emperor voice for Big Finish, I'd always done it with the assistance of a little bit of pitch shift to take it down an octave or so. But I didn't do that for the TV show because there I was doing it on set. I was sort of prepared to suggest to them in post-production they should put a bit of that on, but actually I just did it big and booming down there. And it seemed to work. I
think one of your best deliveries as well, certainly one of my favourite moments watching Doctor Who, it comes from the beginning of Parting of the Ways, and it is "they survived through me," and shivers every time, still to this day. So thanks for
all that stuff about that's all right, mate. And all that stuff about was it actually kept in? There was a line about shredded and sifted or something, or pulped, about the human remains.
Yes,
that was on there because they did cut a couple of lines from that exchange just to make it a bit shorter. I'd love to find out what they were now. It was a much longer scene. But yes, I was trying to get a very low intensity. And a lot of those lines I said really, really quietly right next to the microphone, just in that deep tone and with the ring modulation, which I always say is like playing a very strange musical instrument. It reacts in an extreme way to slight changes in your tone of voice. You know what I mean? It's Yeah, I'm a sad Doctor Who fan.
No,
I just realised.
It's like playing the Jew's harp of death.
Yes. An interesting analogy.
Bonus points for anyone who could understand what that instrument is, or has even heard of it. Now,
that's my impersonation of it. Anyway.
It's not a bad impression, actually.
I've studied for years.
Should be a sessions musician specifically for the Jew's harp. So the Daleks never really went away in popular culture, even after the cancellation of the show. They were always present. There was always things like the Dalek Survival Guide and things like that would always provide new material, and obviously the magazine and Big Finish. But what's it like to be a very big part, obviously, of the character's ongoing superstardom for an entire new generation?
Well, it's lovely. It's really lovely because they're a sort of fun bogeyman, aren't they? They're not. That's part of the sort of massive, epic, fantastical nature of Doctor Who. They do the most awful things, but they're not sickening. It's not like watching a Scandinavian murder mystery, which are great things. But some of that stuff, you just think, oh God,
yeah.
I don't know whether I can eat my dinner tonight. I don't know whether I can go out. I feel depressed about the world. Now the Daleks do worse things really than those horrible murderers, but they do it on such a grand, operatic, completely ridiculous scale that you kind of just love to hate them. And you don't feel you're siding with the devil to like them as a sort of cool thing. You'd think if someone had seen one of these, murder mysteries I'm talking about and said, "Oh God, yeah, that guy who disemboweled, all those people, I really love him." Well, that's just, you'd immediately call the police, wouldn't you? Really? But that's not the same with the Daleks, is it? So it is cool. I mean, there's a brilliant thing that happens every now and again, very rarely, that some people don't have any cultural link with the Daleks, and that's because they've been brought up in a country where Doctor Who was never on, or their parents locked them in a room and never let them watch television. Or they been brought up in Ireland, for example. You talk to people from Southern Ireland, they've never seen Doctor Who. So there are those lovely moments where they say, "Well, what do you do for a living?" You meet them at a social gathering of some sort, and you eventually sort of eventually that's me, this one, eventually just sort of, mock... modestly goes, "Oh, well, actually, I'm the voice of the Daleks," and they go, "Sorry, what?" Well, it's do you know Doctor Who? And you think, oh, well, it's a science fiction program, and they're sort of robots. Yeah, what about them? Well, I do the voice. Oh.
It's such a weird thought that there'd be people who aren't aware of it.
It sounds so unimpressive. It sounds ridiculous. My wife used to work for the UN, and I remember once we met a lot of her friends who, work in really dangerous places and, travel the world all the time. They do proper, serious work for the good of humanity. And they asked what I did, and we did a bit of a thing of, "Oh, shall we tell them?" And when I told them, it was a bit like I'd said, "I do flower arranging," or "I press flowers in books." And they went, Yeah. Anyway, back to Bandarachi and that awful disaster, or whatever. Sort of. And I thought, yeah. These moments are good to, lest I become a monster.
The worst case scenario is you climb inside a metal tank and travel toward them going, do you understand it now?
Yes.
Do you get it now? Like, this is worrying behaviour.
Be impressed.
But speaking of impressed, you've not just been the Dalek since the show came back. You have played, just a list for you off the top of my head. You've been an Ice Warrior, you've been the Jadoon, the Cybermen, every incarnation since its return. Unique Daleks, like the one in Dalek, like Sek and Khan, But Series 1 specifically, as 9 is turn, you were also the Jagrafess.
Oh, yeah, a bit of the Jagrafess, yeah.
And the Nesting Consciousness as well.
And the Nesting Consciousness, yeah. Well, that was the last-minute thing, the Nesting Consciousness. Is in the edit, they realised they needed to cut back to it one more time. Mm-hmm. So it needed another story beat, a little sort of something to lift it. Because in the script, it didn't speak. Mm-hmm. And then they said, what if we cut back to it and it says something? Yeah. And they had several ideas. I can't remember. There were about 3 different lines, one of them being Time Lord, and that's the one that they used. So I went along and made lots of squelchy, farty noises into a microphone. I thought, this is an amazing job. I just finished doing the Dalek job, and I'm standing in a dubbing suite in Air Studios in Hampstead, which is just the most amazing, studios, where they have big orchestras and everything. And the screen takes up the entirety of this huge wall, and I'm standing there looking at this sort of strange bubbling thing and the Doctor walking around the chamber there, and I'm just going and they use that and some noises of pigs and things, and then I just did various takes of and then on the mix that went out on television, really you couldn't hear it, could you?
No,
you couldn't hear that it spoke.
I think it is one of those where I must have read it maybe in the shooting scripts book, or perhaps I'd read it on trivia somewhere, what have you, and I was like, oh yeah, hang on, and then went back to rewatch it, because you're right, the mix is a bit unusual for that.
It's not until it came out in the box set that they remixed it, I think sneakily, and you can hear it really loud and clear. But yeah, when it came out in the vanilla version of the DVD, you had to put the subtitles on, and then it comes up, it says Nestine, Time Lord, and you think, oh yeah, there you are. But I mean, the brilliant thing about me doing that voice was that I got to see Rose before loads of other people, because they were very lax in those days, I said, they said, we want you to do this voice. I said, oh, right, okay. And they said, don't worry, a VHS is in the post. I thought, what? And the next day, I got this jiffy bag with a VHS tape with the early edit of Rose on it, with different music and, Sounds of the Underground was the opening music, across all the montage of London, which worked brilliantly, actually. I was really disappointed it wasn't on the episode. It's probably too expensive to use, frankly. So it was great. So I'd seen this glimpse of Rose, and all the special effects looked like sort of 1973 CSO jobs, because they hadn't finished any of that. I've still got it somewhere. I don't know whether I've got a VHS player anymore, so I should copy it onto a DVD and leak it onto the internet. I'm joking!
Disclaimer, he is indeed joking, it's fine.
I wonder whether it may be generally available now, I don't know. Have you ever seen anything
I've not witnessed it, no.
I have something unique. I've also got all the early edits of Dalek as well.
Oh, nice. Pension there, you got it sorted.
Well, they were very nice on Dalek, because I had all sorts of concerns about the technical quality of the voice occasionally, and so Joe Ahern said to me, I am happy for you to redub any line you want to redub. He said, because I don't really know what you're talking about. So I did, and so me and the dubbing editor, we spent a lot of time umming and ahhing over certain lines, because they set it, you know what a vocal gate is, where it's set at a certain frequency, and if you drop below that frequency, it cuts the sound dead. Well, the sound engineer had set the gate a bit too high on some of that stuff, and so some of the lines were lost. But then we realised that in some of the bits where it cut in and out like that, we looked at each other, Paul and I, and he just went, I don't want you to redo that. He said, I like it when it sort of comes in and out. It sounds like it's breaking down and it's not working properly anymore. And, so a lot of it we went with, actually, and I redubbed far less of it than I'd imagined I would.
You've also, in the last few years, provided the vocals for the Zygons as well. Am I right?
Oh, yeah, I did the Zygons. Yeah. That's the only one of these jobs that I actually asked for and had to audition for. Admittedly, the audition was just me sending a file, but that was because of all the producers, I got quite chummy with Marcus Wilson in a sense that we would email quite regularly about things to do with the show, about the business of it, and that we were having some exchange about something. I think he'd written to me rather sweetly to tell me that he thought that I'd done a good job on an episode, which I think was lovely of him. And I wrote back and said, oh, by the way, you do know that I do Zygon voices as well? And he said, no, I didn't. Do you? Could I hear them, please? And we'd done a Tom Baker Zygon episode for Big Finish called Zygon Hunt, and which had been recorded long before the Zygons were coming back on TV, but wasn't going to be released until way afterwards because we do a lot of stuff in advance with Tom. And so I sent him the files for him to have a listen to, and nothing happened. I thought, that fell on deaf ears then. And then my agent just phoned up and said, oh, by the way, can you go in and do the Zygons next week? I thought, oh, right, I got the job. Fine, great.
Bingo, yes, I shall.
Yeah.
And
that was fun.
I can't pass up the notion of acknowledging your 2 live appearances within the world as well. First being Rick Yates in Torchwood, Children of Earth, which I rewatched recently for I think actually for the first time since maybe getting the DVD in 2010 for Time Team for Doctor Who magazine. It's bloody brilliant, isn't it?
It's really horrifying and upsetting.
It's a very, very dark story, and I sat down with the intention of just watching the whole thing to make my notes, and then went, no, do you know what? I'm gonna stop after episode 2. I'm gonna give myself a day. I'm gonna come back to it.
I think you have to, don't you? Because it is quite harrowing. Yeah. Brilliant television, I thought. Yeah.
But also your live appearance in Doctor Who Live as Winston Churchill, which I saw at Wembley. I remember seeing that.
Did you? Goodness. Yes, I think it were. Yeah, yes, that was fun. All the padding I had to wear for that was incredible. Yeah, they used to joke that I didn't need it, but I honestly did. I used to walk around in it backstage, just the padding. It just made me look like a huge baby in a nappy. It was very strange.
That was bizarre for me because I went in cold. I went in just was like, let's go watch it. And I think very briefly I popped up to the drinks afterwards just for a moment.
Do you know? I do remember seeing you, and I had a word with security, and I think you remember that you were removed quite quickly.
Yeah, there was a forceful tussle with some of the fellas in black and everything. Yeah, but I remember sitting down watching and going, "Oh, Churchill, brilliant!" And I was like, "Hang on, who is that? Who's playing?" And it sort of hit me about 10 minutes later. I was like, "Oh, it's Nicholas Briggs." I was like, "All right, okay." Then momentarily, my attention went back to the floating Dalek, and I was distracted again. But yeah, that was
my favourite part in that was actually when the police came in to find out about the Weeping Angels.
Yes,
and I was playing the main policeman, and that was actually my favourite part. Yeah.
That was brilliant.
There's all that sort of that sort of police talk. Yeah, all right. Yeah, nobody move. We are armed police officers. All that kind of stuff, and the fact that we had the guns and the holsters. On the first performance, we had to walk round the back of the whole arena to enter from the back of the auditorium, the back of the seating, and the venue at Wembley hadn't been warned that there were going to be people dressed as policemen in the show, and armed policemen. So as we walked round, sort of chatting and laughing to each other and readjusting our guns, the front of house people went berserk behind the scenes. They were phoning the whoever was managing the show and sort of saying, "I think we may have to stop the performance. There are armed police in the building. There's some kind of emergency. We didn't see them draw up or anything." And they were going, "No, they're actors." "Well, are you sure they're armed? They've got like megaphones and things, and body armour, and that's really what happened." So it was hilarious. We weren't aware of it, because we the moment you put the uniform on and the peaked cap and everything, you do get a bit of a swagger about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm packing a pistol here. Yeah, I could take anyone down. Which obviously is not what the police are thinking, I'd just like to say, for any younger listeners.
I do love how the younger people there at the time, and I mean myself as well, are all there being scared by the Weeping Angels and the Daleks and everything that's going on. And meanwhile, outside, the front of house staff are cacking themselves.
Because of police, yeah.
That was cool. I didn't realise you were the chief of police in that as well. That's awesome.
Yeah, see.
If I remember rightly, that was, for those who have no idea what Doctor Who Live was, you missed out because it was so much fun.
It was great fun,
It was balmy and just like a real treat, but also very unique with the Weeping Angels. Because if I remember rightly, it was the lights going up that gave them time to move.
What they called a whiteout.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what they do is blind the audience, and then we as the flash went off, a little hole in the stage would open up, and you'd have to jump down that hole, and duck as well, because the gap under the stage wasn't big enough. If I jumped down and just stood there, it would have just been from my chest upwards. Me.
The Weeping Angels have made his legs disappear.
But the funny thing about it was, one of the girls who was in the Weeping Angel looking at me, she said, I watch your face every night, and she said, and you get more and more scared of jumping down that hole every night. I said, you're right. I think I get used to it. I was fine to start with, but every night I had more time to think, what if I get this wrong and crack my head open on the way down? Ooh. And also I had to judge it. I had someone shouting Q in my ear, because we all had in-ear monitors. As you probably know, when you work in a big space like that, your voice is echoing back at you all the time. So if you didn't have the sound coming directly into your ears, you've been talking like this because your voice will be coming back. It's very confusing. So I had someone saying "Q" or "jump" or whatever they said in my ear, and it never seemed to be at the right time to me. So I always had this last moment dilemma of whether to wait for them to tell me to go, or to go when I thought the lights were flashing at the audience. I know some people saw it in different auditoria and said, yeah, we saw you jump. Did you see me jump?
I didn't see you jump, no.
So it looked like we disappeared.
It did indeed.
Are you lying?
No, I'm not lying. I was.
Could you see the big arm that the flying Dalek
that was the thing I did see, because I was to the side. I was stage right, so I was getting a face full of Dalek arm.
What a shame. They were so proud of that.
It looked... I put it this way. I may have seen the arm, but I also saw the faces of the amazed people in the stalls seeing a Dalek flying and being completely entranced by it. That was a very cool experience. It was a very cool experience. That must have been fun / very stressful to be a part of.
Well, it was very tiring, but it was huge fun, and it was a fantastic company of people. I don't think I'm really in touch with any of them anymore. It's strange because, it was quite a short amount of time. It was just a few weeks, but we all bonded, It was all crazy, crazy hard work. I was originally hired also to bulk up the chorus singing, and I can sort of sing, but singing, being able to sell a song in an actory way and being able to do close harmonies with a load of really good singers, and you're mic'd closely, and if your harmony isn't correct, you just sound like a donkey, spoiling it all for everyone else. Those are two different things. And as I said to the musical director and the director, after a day of me trying to learn these things, I said, think of it as mathematics. I did an audition where you said, what's 2 + 2? And I said 4, and you said, brilliant. I said, what you're giving me now is really complex algebra. And that, I can't do that. That's just, I am never going to learn that. I could learn it in my lifetime, but not in the next 2 weeks, So I volunteered. I actually said to them, you can sack me if you like, because I feel like I'm letting you down. I said, but I volunteered for extra monster duties. So in all those bits where there were other monsters, not Cybermen, because no one wants to get in a Cyberman costume, not unless you're mad. But lots of other monsters going around, I was playing other monsters. And it gave me a much busier show, because otherwise I would have been sitting around at the back thinking, oh, God, it'll be Churchill in half an hour and, the policeman in another half an hour. I was busy all the time putting a smiler face on and goodness knows what else. I did other little things. And that was fun, walking around the audience doing that. I would go up to people in the audience who I knew. And I nearly said something very rude to one of them, but I thought, they don't know it's me, do they? So if I say something rude, they're going to go and complain, and then I'll... So yeah, it was a great fun show.
One of the smilers made me frown. And I can't let you go without, as well, touching on Big Finish, of course. We've mentioned it many a time, good sir. But for our younger listeners, because we've got quite a few listeners on here who grew up with Doctor Who, which still frightens me that there are people in the world, like, it's brilliant, obviously, a new generation, but that there are kids who've never known it as that show that came back. It's that show that's always been there. For our younger listeners, how would you sell them Big Finish? How would you introduce them to the worlds of past Doctor audios and let's start there. Let's not tell them about Dark Shadows just yet, or Dorian Gray,
or the Avengers, or the Prisoner, or let's start with Doctor Who. Let's get them hooked on that first. Well, I mean, the thing is, listening to the kind of audio adventures we do with all the past Doctors. And we're starting to do stuff from the new era of Doctor Who. We're doing a series called Unit, which has, Kate Stewart in and stuff like that. It's sort of midway between the delight of reading a book and imagining everything you're reading and watching a movie, because what you get the voices and you get the sound effects and you get incredible music, and it sort of conjures up all these incredible images. And if you've never listened to radio drama before, or even a talking book, although that's a different thing because that's just a voice speaking to you, telling you a story. This is actually, the original actors interacting with each other and with great monsters like the Daleks. All the old monsters are there. It's something that it might take you a few goes to adjust to, but I think once you do, you never go back, because it's a partnership between your ears and your imagination, and your ears and your brain are quite close, so they get on very, very well.
Would you recommend any starting points maybe for those who've never delved in, like one where they could just leap in and give it a try?
Well, there's an Eighth Doctor story called The Chimes of Midnight, which is a great one by Rob Shearman. Yeah. There's also one called Spare Parts, which is a story about the origin of the Cybermen. But a whacking, great, fantastic Dalek story to start with is Blood of the Daleks, which is a two-part one, two 1-hour episodes, starring Paul McGann as the Eighth Doctor and Sheridan Smith as Lucy Miller. Sheridan has gone on to do all sorts of mega famous things. There's so many, I can't list them. Like, she played Scylla, didn't she, in that thing on ITV? It's just incredible actress. And that is a fantastic, rip-roaring adventure, very much in the style of the new series, Blood of the Daleks, really, by a fantastic writer called Steve Lyons. I'd recommend those. Anything else I could recommend? Oh, and there's a box set that came out a year or so ago called Dark Eyes, and it's 4-hour-long episodes, and and that's the Eighth Doctor with the Daleks and Time Lords and what have you, and it's that's intended as a stepping on point. It's a whole season of Doctor Who in 4 hours in a way, and he's got a new companion there called Molly O'Sullivan, who's a nursing assistant from the First World War, and it starts in the First World War and then goes all over the universe and Daleks, and whoa, it's very exciting. So I'd recommend that, Dark Eyes. Yeah, so those are good jumping on points. Yeah, definitely.
Dark Eyes especially as well, I think, because you also get a taste of the Daleks, sometimes the Master as well. Like,
when you proceed to the other box sets, you've got all the great Doctor Who monsters there. But I would recommend, of course, that you go to bigfinish.com, which is the website, and there's a button on the front page which says New to Big Finish, and if you press that, it gives you a few things that you can buy, but also there's some freebie stuff as well. Look around the site, you'll find all the trailers are free to download or stream, and there are quite a few little freebies here and there. There's also a podcast, a regular podcast, featuring me and a bunch of other idiots, and but also a great podcast by a chap called Toby Haydock, who you may know is a big Doctor Who fan, comedian, actor, writer, and he is on a mission to have an interview that mentions has an anecdote from every single Doctor Who story in the first 50 years. And that's called Toby Haydock's Who's Round. And it's a little news round joke there.
Yeah. I got it.
It even has the old-fashioned logo of John Craven's News Round on it. And he interviews, and it's a fantastic resource of information and anecdotes on old Doctor Who episodes. So there's lots going on the Big Finish site. That's bigfinish.com, he said, unashamedly advertising.
But advertise away, sir. Like, I want to spread the love. And speaking of spreading the love, my Doctor, as I've mentioned previously on this series, my Doctor is very much the Ninth Doctor, simply because he won over everybody at school, and this was a show I was aware of, and a show I'd grown up reading Target books and having the few DVDs that were sort of out around the time, and I was absolutely over the moon that it was coming back, but I was praying that everyone else would get it when it returned, and it did. And for some reason, that's always latched my heart to Eccleston's Doctor.
No, I think he's brilliant, and I love the darkness in him. And I enjoyed working with him, and I would love to work with him again. Maybe one day that can happen through Big Finish. I know that he sort of departed from Doctor Who and hasn't said kindly things about his experience on it, but I never saw him having a bad experience, and he was great to have around. He took the role, very definitely upon his shoulders, and you could see him working very hard and loving it.
But you got to dip a toe into the Ninth Doctor well as well, specifically, which sounds really weird now said out loud. When you think of something in your head, you think, yeah, that'll make sense, and then it doesn't. You're the, as far as I'm aware, apart from sort of audio books themselves of the new series Adventures, you are the only other actor to portray his incarnation of the Doctor in Night of the Whisper.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Which I absolutely adored, because for me, for him being my Doctor, I really enjoy Series 1. I like the fact that it has a beginning and an end and an arc that fits within that year, and it's you get the best of everything for a first year in that run. But it's always nice to see if there's any new stuff on the horizon, and Night of the Whisper was the perfect kind of little pick-me-up for Night
of the Whisper was part of a series called Destiny of the Doctor.
Yeah, not to be confused with Destiny of the Doctors, the 90s PC game.
Well, who would ever confuse it with that? No one knew about it until you just mentioned it. Outrageous, controversial, yes. You get it all here. Yes, it was a 50th anniversary celebration, so it had all stories with all 11 Doctors, and I was the narrator, and I did the voice. I did Rose's voice as well.
You did a very good Billy Piper.
Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, it was a nod in that direction. Said Rose is always a good way of identifying that it was her speaking, I think. So I did a bit of Chris Eccleston, which is interesting.
That was quite cool.
My key phrase to get into it was perhaps unfairly cracking cheese, Gromit.
Yes, I won't.
Even though it's the wrong accent.
I won't lie. That made me punch the air at the time when I listened to it, because I just thought, that's brilliant. Look, just got a Wallace and Gromit reference in Doctor Who. Fantastic. And also, get to play Captain Jack, and also it's a superhero story as well. It's
great, isn't it?
Vigilante flick.
It's a lovely piece of work and a great script. I had a fantastic time doing it, and I thought that the whole post-production and the soundscape really sounded authentic, didn't it? They did a brilliant job on it. Very pleased, and it's and bless anyone who heard it. It was extremely popular. People, I think, I was told by Michael Stevens, who was the editor of that range, the creative editor. He said that it was the best received of them all, and probably the highest selling as well. So that's amazing.
A lot of love for that series and that TARDIS team, I think. A lot of love for people wanting to hear more. If people are wondering how this is connected to this week's 9 is 10, John Schwab did the did additional voices in it, who was in Dalek as well.
He was, yes.
And also it was written by Mark Wright. Am I right there? Cavan Scott, who may or may not be appearing later in the series of 9 is 10, but I'll say no more. So I don't know why I made that sound.
It just makes things more interesting.
No, do you know what makes things more interesting, Sir Nicholas Briggs? Thank you so much for this week. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you here in
thank you.
The world of 9 is 10. Where can we find you? Let's be honest, a lot of the people listening to this, they already know where you are. They've got you online. They're subscribed to Big Finish. But for those uninitiated, for those not in the know, where can we find you online, and what projects should we be on the lookout for?
Oh, I say. There's all sorts of stuff going on. There's so much I can't tell you. And it's bigfinish.com. There's my website, nicholasbriggs.com, which has bits of news and stuff on it. And one of the things I'm working on at the moment is an audio dramatisation of the 1960s series The Prisoner, which some of you may remember. Yes, and I'm working on that at the moment. There's nothing else I can actually tell you. It's all too top secret.
Well, come on.
You mean...
Go on.
You mean like you're talking about the television series?
Yeah, come on. You're a man on the inside. You've got to know. Series 9, Doctor Who, come on. Come on.
Hold on. The signal's breaking up. Something's cutting through. No.
Attention! Attention! We are invading this podcast. All information can be neither confirmed nor denied. Cease speculation, or you will be exterminated.